sometimes people misunderstand that we represent the police. We do not. They think that we represent victims. We do not. We advocate for victims, and when we prosecute cases, we advocate for the work of law enforcement. But we also have to balance the rights and the fairnesses of how to handle someone charged with a crime. And you have to be able to hold both in your hands at the same time and balance them as a prosecutor. I find that really challenging and worthwhile.
This is RVA Trial Lawyers, Virginia's trial lawyer podcast, hosted by Sharif Gray and Niall Abuzaki.
All right, we're back, and today we've got Joe Platania. Did I pronounce that right, actually?
You did.
Excellent. So before we get started, I've actually got a story to tell. So we have this little studio in downtown Richmond, and the only way to actually get to like our office is taking the elevator. And when the elevator's down, it's a mess. Well, today, Joe beat us here, which is not uncommon. Now and I, despite my however many years in the Army, timeliness is not something that's a skill of mine. But Joe got here first, and then I get a call, and Joe's locked out on the fire escape. And so it's like, anyway, so we rushed in, tried to figure it out. But no, more importantly, Joe, really excited to have you. You're a longtime criminal trial lawyer, started off at the public defender's office, and now are the Commonwealth attorney for Charlottesville. There's a number of things that we certainly want to ask you about. Charlottesville, of course, is near and dear to my heart, having gone to law school there. And but anyways, so really excited to have you. Why don't you take a minute or two and introduce yourself, and then we'll get into it.
Sure. Being locked out on the fire escape is a good reminder for people that do trial work to expect the unexpected and learn to deal with it. So it was maybe timely that I got locked out before coming on with you guys to talk about trial work. I graduated from Washington and Lee in 1998. I spent my first year out of law school at the Virginia Resource Center doing post-conviction work in capital murder cases, and learned very quickly that I didn't have the intellect to be sitting at a desk doing legal research and writing. I wanted to be in a courtroom interacting with people. Went to Charlottesville in 99 when Jim Hingley, now the Albemarle County Commonwealth's attorney, opened a public defender's office. So I was a public defender for 5 years, loved it, but saw during my time as a public defender that prosecutors had all the power. So I was like, I can probably help my clients as a prosecutor more than I can as a public defender, which is not the traditional route to prosecution, to want to help people charged with a crime. But that's what brought me to prosecuting in the city in 2003. Loved it, learned very quickly about victims and working with law enforcement and the importance of community safety. And so got a more balanced approach as a line prosecutor. My boss retired in 2017. I never had any aspirations or desires to run for office or be an elected prosecutor, but he left. There was a vacancy. I thought I could do a good job. Ran, was fortunate enough to be elected, and my first year in office was unpacking the events from August 12th of 2017, the Unite the Right rally. So it was kind of drinking from a fire hose for a little while there.
So, something that I think connects all three of us actually is, of course, you had your hands full with that. I actually represented a U.S. Army soldier who participated in that in a criminal proceeding in the Army. Niall actually prosecuted a guy who was an organizer of that event as a special prosecutor with Shannon Taylor in Charlottesville. So I knew we were going to get there. So anyways, but...
and I'll tell you, even before prosecuting the case in Albemarle County, because it happened in Albemarle County, because UVA campus, and a lot of people don't know that, is not in the city of Charlottesville. As soon as you step foot on the UVA campus, now you're in Albemarle County. You step foot off UVA campus, now you're in the city of Charlottesville, Joe's jurisdiction. So I prosecuted the case with Shannon Taylor in Albemarle County, and I remember before going to trial, and I was like, we need to kind of bounce some things of someone that's familiar with the area. And who was that person that I got on the phone with Shannon? It was actually Joe. And I hadn't met Joe, but even prior to that date where we got on the phone, it was probably like a 30, 40-minute conversation going back and forth and just discussing some legal issues that we were working on. Joe also runs the prosecutorial clinic. Is it called the prosecutor clinic at UVA?
prosecution clinic at UVA for third-year law school.
And Joe sent a student that I mentored. And then I went out of my way to reach out to Joe and to commend him for the work that he's doing and commend him for the clinic, and also compliment this particular student who's doing great things now. So Joe, excited to have you, and clearly you did a great job prosecuting that case. And as a matter of fact, during trial, we'll go down and grab a cup of coffee and on Heather Higher Way, right? And that is the young girl that was run down on August 12th. We dealt with the August 11th Unite the Right rally that took place on the UVA campus. You dealt with the August 12th. So first, before we get into that, or you know what, let's talk about being a prosecutor. It is near and dear to my heart as well. And I will tell you, before I got on the bench, I always dreamed of being a career prosecutor. And I'm not sure, and I'll say it, I'm not sure if that dream, I've given up on that dream, right? But I had a calling to do something different, and I'm answering that calling. What does being a prosecutor mean to you? And the reason why I asked that question is because you're right. They are the most powerful actor in the courtroom.
Real quick. So that's like a massive tease right there. Like, we're talking about the Unite the Right case, and I'm thinking, okay, yes, we're going to hear about the facts, the nitty-gritty details. Can we promise to, at least after this part, we go and ask Joe to share that case with us?
Sure. Clearly, He doesn't have much patience. Clearly.
No, I was ready to listen. I was excited. But no, this is important. Let's talk about being a prosecutor.
Well, I think there's probably a reason it crept into your bloodstream and it's still there. It really is, in my opinion, the best job in the legal system. I love being a prosecutor. It's hard and it's complex. I frequently talk about one of the comments to the rules of professional conduct where prosecutors are charged with being ministers of justice. I don't know what that means. I've been doing this for 25, 26 years, and I still don't know what it means. I think it's a bit of an aspirational charge to us as prosecutors to be ministers of justice. And we really, sometimes people misunderstand that we represent the police. We do not. They think that we represent victims. We do not. We advocate for victims, and when we prosecute cases, we advocate for the work of law enforcement. But we also have to balance the rights and the fairnesses of how to handle someone charged with a crime. And you have to be able to hold both in your hands at the same time and balance them as a prosecutor. I find that really challenging and worthwhile. I'm sure I get it wrong more often than I get it right, but it's really fun to try and figure out a solution to a problem. We have an office sort of saying that came about, and it uses some restorative justice terms, but I think it really, for me personally, captures what it means to be a prosecutor. And we have it on an office challenge coin, but it's safety and stability through healing and repair. And I tell everyone in the office, if we can be guided by every decision we make and every problem we try and unpackage and solve, if we can be guided by those words, safety and stability through healing and repair, we're going to get it right most of the time. And the safety and stability is the safety and stability of the community and for victims, but it's also stability for people charged with the crime. And healing and repair also equally applies to victims of crime. We want them to be able to heal and repair the trauma that they oftentimes have gone through. But you both know, having done criminal work, you're probably a little limited on what you can say now as a judge, but you see it, I'm sure, every day. But the folks that come into the criminal justice system charged with the crime oftentimes have massive amounts of trauma that they're dealing with and having to unpackage. And so I think the community wins when we can help those charged with the crime heal and repair themselves in their lives and make them productive members of society and family members and coworkers and parents. So that's a bit of a rambling answer, but it's just so much, and every day is a new blank canvas that you get to paint on. And I really enjoy the challenge of it. And I'm really humbled by the opportunity to do that really important work.
Joe, I've always had the philosophy when I was a prosecutor that your job as a prosecutor is to put both the victim and the defendant in a better position in a way out of the system than into the system. So you ask yourself, what can I do to help the victim heal? What can I do to find ways to repair the defendant so the defendant does not victimize someone else? And I used to tell young prosecutors, if you don't do your job with the defendant, and this defendant goes out and victimizes someone else, then you took part in this indirectly took part in the victimization of victim number 2. So you have to do your part. And not many prosecutors appreciate that notion. It's not a Band-Aid where you sentence someone and you put them back out. It's how can I put them in a better position where I'm actually serving the community? Your job is to voice the victim's voices in court. But just like the victim is part of the community, the defendant is also part of this community that you represent. So have you been able to help heal and repair through the last few years? And if so, in what ways? What kind of services are y'all providing? And how are y'all helping?
What a great question. I'd like to also just note that everything I have said and am going to say is my personal view. And there are a lot of prosecutors in the Commonwealth of Virginia and throughout the country that would vehemently and strongly disagree with my vision of what it means to be a prosecutor. And I'm okay with that. I don't think everyone thinks and shares the vision that I have, but I am responsible for 10 square miles in the city of Charlottesville and 45,000 citizens there. That's who I work for. I don't represent the police or victims, but I do work for the voters in the city of Charlottesville, and I'm answerable to them every 4 years. I think a lot of it in doing it for a while is, you're sort of the oak tree metaphor. Maybe you're planting a seed that you're not going to ever see it grow and bear fruit. It's trying to do little things that you might not ever see. I'll share an anecdote that still sticks with me to this day. I was prosecuting a young man. He was African American, and to me, we should lean into race and gender and poverty and power differentials in doing the work that we do and be okay to have candid conversations about that. Young African American man, he was involved in a very violent shooting incident. Luckily, no one was hurt, but I advocated for a lengthy prison sentence, which was 7 years, which to me is lengthy. Put on the argument, the judge sentenced him to about 7 years, and I went over to him as he was being let out in the shackles to go back to the holding cell and head to the Department of Corrections. And I asked the defense attorney for permission to address the young man, and he said, sure. And I put my hand out and I said, look, I want to wish you well. Like when you finish the sentence, I'm really hopeful that you get out and do something with your life. And didn't really think much about it and turned and walked out. Well, he wrote me a letter that I still have. And he said, the fact that you took the time to just see me as a human being and sort of wish me well and not just as, some thug criminal, he said it meant a lot to me. And I do want to, when I get out, prove your words to me had meaning, and I do want to do well. And I just always remember that as a prosecutor, just you can do your job and you can be tough and you can hold people accountable, but always treating people with dignity and respect means a lot more than we sometimes realize. So I don't have a good answer to your question, but anecdotally, when I walk around town, sometimes there's a car toot, Joe, I'm doing great, thanks. And that those are good days.
Yeah, that's awesome.
And that's the aspiration to being a minister of justice. Being a minister of justice can be a simple conversation, can be a simple recognition that you see this young man, even though he may not appreciate the fact that you see him because you're up on your feet arguing for a sentence to put him away. And what's more important than liberty? It's someone's death, right? Someone's life. You're taking someone's liberty away for 7 years, and you're asking the court to do that, but you see him and you recognize him as a human being. And that's a simple notion, but it's overlooked. I often try to ask people how they're doing as soon as they step into the courtroom. And it kind of just calms them down. And it's the fact that you see them as a human being, not just as a party, not just as a felon in your case. So that is important. So talking about prosecution, and you talk about an aspiration, and there is no perfect minister, because the more you prosecute, it seems like the more you learn, and the more you start to figure things out. Is that what you've seen throughout your career?
Yeah, I don't know about you guys, but I knew everything and was perfect at 18. And it's been downhill ever since.
Yeah.
At least in your mind, right?
It's funny how
Yeah.
this comes up often, but like as the responsibilities seemingly continue to accrue, right? Like you have a kid, you get another kid, you have a house, you have a mortgage, you have bills, and it's like,
What am I doing?
yeah, like when do I actually figure this thing out? And I think the secret is, right, when I'm 60, 70 years old, I'm going to realize that you never do figure it out, right? You just kind of do your best as you go along. But and I think in many respects, being a lawyer, the practice of law is like that too.
Well, that's why they call it a practice.
That's
and
right.
yes, I think the longer I do it, the more I realize what I don't know. And when that becomes comforting and comfortable, that you're able to sort of say, wow, there's so much I don't know. And sometimes it's in front of a judge or even a jury, if you're careful with how you do it. Really, I think what that goes to is just our shared humanity. We don't know everything. We're not perfect. One of my pet peeves about the profession of prosecution is sometimes the arrogance and hubris that you see. And sometimes it's in younger prosecutors more than older prosecutors, that they feel like it's got to be blood sport and you've got to win. Right. You mentioned I teach the prosecution clinic at the University of Virginia School of Law. So they're third-year students that have practice certificates, and they're prosecuting cases all throughout Central Virginia in different offices. And sometimes they'll come in and share a story about a case that they won. And I'm like, as a prosecutor,
You don't win.
Don't ever say you've won a case, or don't ever say you've lost a case. And Judge Richard Moore, who's retired but still sits, taught me this. He said, words have meaning, and the words that you use and choose all have meaning. So be very intentional about the words that you use and that you choose. Because if you come in and are talking about a case with a defendant and say, I won, I mean, how does that make maybe a defendant feel? And again, it's in advocating for victims and making them feel heard and made whole and dealing with what they've been through. It's cold comfort that there's a conviction sometimes. They don't see it as a win. They've gone through a horrible thing. So I don't personally like that language around prosecution.
It rubs me the wrong way when younger prosecutors, and I call them out. And I was the only one in my office that would actually call them out in front of everyone. Like, you don't win as a prosecutor. You never win as a prosecutor. You still have a 13-year-old girl that's been sexually molested by her father that's going to have to deal with for the rest of her life. And you have a man that there's something wrong with him up there. And I don't know what it is, and I don't know what led it. Maybe victimization in the past that it's never been addressed. That's going to spend the next 28 years in prison. So please tell me who won. And saying that, kind of resonates a bit, and they start to think about, well, what is my job? My job is not about winning. My job, and at times, it's not about convicting either. It's going back to that notion, addressing the issues by going back to your challenge, going healing and repair. And you try your best. And our best often is not perfect and often falls short. But we do what we can do when we're dealing with humans.
How do you make that switch? And let me give some more context. When I was in law school, the only thing I ever thought I could ever see myself doing was prosecute. That's it. Like, I was prosecute, get the bad guys, put them in jail. That's who I am. And I remember and I actually ended up, when I went into the Army, I thought I'm going to prosecute. And I was actually pretty upset when I found out that my first assignment wasn't prosecution. It was actually doing defense work. And it wasn't until I did that defense work and met the human being on the other side who was being accused and saw some of the injustices. I mean, certainly there are things that our guys did and they needed to be held accountable for, but there was overcharging. I had clients who I genuinely believe didn't do what they were charged. And it was that experience for me that I think helped me when I did prosecute understand the other side, and I hope do a better job compared to a younger version of me. When you see younger prosecutors, what is it that takes them from, what is it, they're a hammer and every defendant is a nail, whatever that saying is, to a more balanced approach like the one that we're talking about?
Great question. I want to just follow up on your observations. My predecessor had a term they used that I think really captures what we do in the criminal justice system with criminal prosecution. He said it's a rough approximation of justice. That's our best day, is a rough approximation of justice. You're never going to really get better than that. I'm uncomfortable painting with too broad of a brush about young prosecutors. I think there's some experienced prosecutors that have the same worldview. You have to remember, speaking just about Virginia, there's 120 jurisdictions in the Commonwealth of Virginia. So there's 120 elected prosecutors. And that means there's 120 different views about how they want their office to go about discharging their duties. So I want to reiterate, I'm always very careful to not judge how other offices and other communities go about their business. But in Charlottesville, and for myself personally, if someone wanted to work as a prosecutor and said, I just want to lock the bad guys up, you're not a fit for our office. First of all, we don't call people bad guys or have that worldview. And I'm not picking on what you said. I think that's a very common theme of what people say was why they want to prosecute. I want to, lock up bad people. I think, again, for Charlottesville, having a much more nuanced view, and we don't always get it right, and it's very difficult, but I think you have sort of a philosophical mindset and view of the world, and I think it can grow as you become older and mature and maybe have a family and get different perspectives. But I think what I look for in a prosecutor is the heart of someone that just, again, wants to be humble and treat people with dignity and respect and fight your tail off for victims and protect them and make them feel heard and advocated for and go to the mat and battle for them. And sometimes that means holding someone accountable and asking for significant prison sentences. But going back to what I said before, you always have to hold at the same time that there's someone across the courtroom. And you, I believe, have an ethical obligation to them in their situation as well. And having done it for a while, 90% plus of these crimes, I mean, they're really bad. And there are some people that are evil, you do encounter evil, but I think it's the minority of the cases. I think most of what you're dealing with is people that aren't bad folks. They've made a bad decision.
Talking about if you do your job right as a prosecutor, interestingly enough, and Sharif, you talked about switching from defense attorney to prosecutor. I was asked questions before I made it to the bench. Well, Niall, you've never done defense work. How are you going to appreciate the defendants that come before you if you've never really connected with them? And I tell them, if you're a prosecutor in the meaning that the prosecutor carries what a prosecutor should do, you're actually taking the defendant into consideration in every single plea offer that you make.
You should be.
And you should be. And I tell them, as a matter of fact, prosecutors play prosecutor, defense attorney, and judge in 90% of the cases because they usually fashion an offer that addresses the healing, the reparation, and then they go before the court and they present it. Because 90% of our cases, and over 90% of cases, are not even tried, and a judge is not even involved. You just get up and you do what you do, and if a prosecutor is unreasonable, that number is not going to be 90% because you're going to have a defense attorney saying, hey, that's not a reasonable offer. You're being a bit unreasonable here. So if you're doing your job right, then you're seeing this particular defendant as a human being that's a son, brother, maybe a father, maybe a husband, maybe a wife, and they can be a productive member of this community. So it's how do you keep that in check?
how do you do that also when you're talking about, and I think you know where I'm going, when we talk about those Unite the Right cases, when we're talking about just really egregious conduct?
Well, I'll come back to that. May I tell an anecdote?
Of course, yeah.
So the power vested in the prosecutor is pretty much total and complete. I mean, you're a judge now. Judges have nowhere near the power the prosecutors have. And you make charging decisions.
No, I'm joking.
What's that?
I said, how does that feel?
But you know, I'm right.
I agree with that. No, and I tell prosecutors in my office, as soon as they walk in, you're the most powerful actor. And with great power, and I'll quote Spider-Man, comes great responsibility.
That's right, Uncle Ben.
Exactly. And you can't lose sight of that. That is so powerful. You can literally affect someone's life. And when you affect someone's life, you're affecting not only them, their children, future generations to come, and the people in their family. So keep that in mind, but keep going.
Yeah, and no disrespect to any judges that are listening. I'm just stating a fact. Here's a quick anecdote that really, I think, brings that home. It's a case I had as a prosecutor. Citizen calls 911 and says, I just heard a gunshot outside of my residence. It's a very dense urban neighborhood in Charlottesville. Patrol officer responds. There's an intoxicated guy standing there. Next to him on a ledge is a gun. The officer's like, hey, we got a call for a gunshot. The guy was intoxicated. He's like, yeah, I just squeezed a round off into the air. There's the gun. So full confession. It wasn't even Miranda. It was just a voluntary conversation. The guy's like, there's the gun. I did it. Officer runs his criminal history. He has a 20-year-old breaking and entering, which in Virginia is a violent felony for purposes of being able to possess a firearm. So the officer very appropriately arrests him and charges him with violent felon in possession of a gun, which is a 5-year mandatory minimum. So we've got the gun, we've got a full confession. It's a slam dunk case. The guy's going for 5 years. Now it's a 20-year-old breaking and entering. And I think sometimes I tell the story because sometimes people are surprised breaking and entering is considered a violent offense, but under the code it is. It's not rape, robbery, or murder. And the guy shouldn't have had a gun and he shouldn't have fired it off. I'm not excusing it. But the defense attorney calls and says he's older, he mentors young kids in his basement and teaches music. She's like, can we agree to a bond at least while we sort this out? And she presented a really good plan. He had a stable place. He had employment. I don't think he was a risk to commit acts of violence. So I go in and tell the judge we've got an agreement on bond. So the judge listens to the prosecutor. So he releases the guy on bond. Then the defense attorney's like, do you really think this guy needs 5 years in prison? He's guilty, but... So I said no. So I took a pen, and this story, every time I tell it, it blows my mind. I took a pen as a prosecutor, and I just crossed out violent felony on the warrant. That's all I did and initialed it. The 5-year mandatory minimum evaporated because I crossed out the words violent felon on a warrant. So now it's 0 to 5. The judge can give him whatever. She's like, okay, now we can at least argue and it's a fair fight. So he's out not because of Joe, but because of the power of a prosecutor. He's now not facing a mandatory 5 because of the power of a prosecutor. We go up to circuit court. He's been out for like 6 to 9 months doing well. We came to an agreement where he pled guilty, and I said, let's come back in a year, and if he's doing well, give him a reckless discharge of a firearm. He spent a couple days in jail, time served. Guy comes back a year later, done everything well, readjusted, no trouble, ended up with a misdemeanor reckless discharge of a firearm, time served, and we all go on our way. That story should terrify anyone that heard it. That's not a story of like justice and wonderful. That's terrifying.
It's power of a prosecutor.
It should terrify everyone. And I tell that story. That's what you sort of are able to do or not do as a prosecutor. Again, I'm sorry. You guys are so easy to talk. I forgot your question.
We can go for hours. This is awesome. You know what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to get us to the Unite the Right case.
Let's get to that. So
can we hear about the
facts? Unite the Right case. So things started on August 11th. There was a march that took place on UVA campus. So let's talk a bit. Why don't you talk a bit about the march that took place on August 11th, and then what was planned for August 12th, and what unfolded?
Well, you have to remember that I was just an assistant when all that happened.
Yes.
I didn't take office till January 1st of 2018. So I was not really involved in a lot of that other than I lived in the city. But there was the Tiki Torch rally on the campus on August 11th where...
I still dream about Tiki Torches and whether or not they are burning objects.
Yeah.
But I'll let
Well, no, it's
I remember having that conversation where we were Blue Atlas.
No, you and I had that conversation.
yeah,
Yes.
and the imagery's burned in everyone's minds because of
It was there was a sea of tiki torches marching across campus.
And then the next day was the Unite the Right rally, and James Alex Fields Jr. drove his car into a group of counter-protesters, killing Heather Heyer. I mean, it was a really traumatic event for the city of Charlottesville. I think 8 years later, we're still kind of healing and recovering. There's also, there's a legacy of segregation in the city of Charlottesville and separation of, different racial groups. And so it was just, it was a lot to have to deal with as a prosecutor. I'm not sure I have great stories. I think going through the trial was really tough and traumatic. I had an unbelievable partner, Nina Elise Antony, who's now the chief deputy. She really, in many ways, was the lead prosecutor on that and several of the other cases, and was just an unbelievable trial partner. But people forget we also charged 3 local African-American men with committing acts of violence. And the community at the time was just furious with me for charging any of the counter-protesters with anything. And at the time I said, I have to prosecute conduct, not content. And if you start picking sides, and I was very sympathetic to the ideology of the counter-protesters and was mortified by some of the viewpoints of the alt-right individuals. But that's what happened in the 50s in the South when, if your team was in power and, the Klan was doing stuff and you had a prosecutor that was sympathetic to the Klan in the Deep South, and, well, those boys didn't really do anything. If you're picking to prosecute content, not conduct, that's a scary thing. And so that was another struggle and I've talked about that before in a CLE presentation, the high profile nature of the case. A lot of people were very unhappy with me, and it was a tough thing to sort through.
It's not blind justice. If you're actually deciding what is, as a minister of justice, what is justice and what is not, you got to focus on the conduct. You can't focus on the content and be like, okay, I'm just not going to, I'm going to see this as mortifying, but I'm going to see this as something that I sympathize with. And as a prosecutor, I'm not going to prosecute. No, I think that kind of oversteps the discretion of a prosecutor. There were criminal acts that were committed. So, a bit about the facts for those that are not privy to what unfolded, how many charges, and the sentence that was imposed.
I'm also curious to learn, what was the defense? What did they argue? Why did it go to trial?
So there were a couple prosecutions. Several individuals beat DeAndre Harris in the parking garage. And so I believe 2 of those went to trial. The third individual pled. So there were, I believe, 3 prosecutions. A man named Richard Preston, I think, shot a gun at Corey Long, who had ignited an aerosol can.
Yes.
To the alt-right individuals leaving the park, and he took a gun and shot at Corey Long. Didn't hit anyone, but he was charged.
And all that was on camera. That was a recording on camera,
all on camera. And then James Alex Fields, who plowed his car into the group of counter-protesters killing Heather Heyer. In that case, the defense was he was provoked, the counter-protesters were aggressive, and he panicked and was sort of not acting maliciously and in a premeditated way. He was just trying to sort of get himself out of a bad situation. And the jury did not find that persuasive and convicted him of several felonies. I think he got life plus a significant number of years. But yeah, I mean, I think it was like a 3-week trial, and it was, it'll probably be the only case I'll handle with national media attention. And again, I was a brand new elected prosecutor, was just trying to figure it all out, but we got through it. And, but it was pretty emotional. It was, tough. And I'm sure for the jurors too, it was just a horrible, tragic, violent. I mean, the co-counsel that I did it with still to this day, just the images and the sounds and stuff it was kind of rough stuff.
Was there any conversations that took place with the jurors after the fact, or have you hear back from jurors?
We did not end up following up with any of the jurors. I think they sort of had it as a personal experience.
And they just, A case that got a lot of media coverage. How were you able to balance that with also doing your job, and you're a new prosecutor, and it's gaining national coverage every single night, and you're telling yourself, hey, I got to kind of reel back. And often we all love, to a certain extent, to be out in the media and get our word out and show that we're doing good work. How are we able to kind of reel
Why do you
that back
think we
in?
started this podcast, right? No, I'm joking. I'm joking.
Yeah.
Not really. No, I'm joking.
Keeping your ego in check.
That's right.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to tell you a story about how I did not do that with this case. But one of the things, and I really, again, need to reiterate and give so much credit to my trial partner, Nina Antony, we made a very conscious decision to not make it about political ideology.
That's important.
Because it would have been so easy, and everyone was
Yes.
thirsting for us just to, and it's the easy way. It's like he went to one of the concentration camps. He had Mein Kampf next to his bed. Like he was, I mean, the racial ethnic flavor of this case was just like everywhere. And we made the decision that we didn't need to even point it out. It was just so apparent. And it did not relate to one of the elements we had to prove. So we decided early on to just leave that alone and let it speak for itself and not over prosecute the case. I mean, it was all recorded. It was all on video. So we made the decision to not over prosecute the case. And we used a term internally like, let's just stay out of the way of the evidence. Like, let's just not make this about us. Let's let the evidence speak for itself. There's nothing that's going to be more powerful than that. And I think that ended up being a really wise tactical move. But I remember being in the middle of that trial, newly elected, with a big old fat, arrogant head. And the office manager called me at a lunch break. And she's like, we have a first appearance on a probation violation that the judge needs to take up at the lunch break. And I was like, I'm the most important person around right now trying to
country.
in the country. I'm like, what are you talking about? I'm like, I can't do a first appearance on a probation violation. I'm like, I'm way too important for that. I'm up here trying a case in front of the national media. And she's like, get your ass back here and get the file. She goes, there's no one else around and no one gives a shit that you're doing this. She's like, get back here and get the file and do the first appearance. And she hung up on me. And I remember I was like, that really brought me back to earth. Like, Joe, it's not about you. Like, go get the file and do the first appearance. And that happened within the first week of trial. And that was good for me. Because I'm not going to lie, you do start getting a little bit of a big head and thinking yourself important, and getting yelled at by the office administrator was a really good thing for me. So that helped bring me back down to earth. Because it's not about me. There were all these victims and their family members, and it was about them having their day in court, not about me.
And really, I mean, that's a principle to embody in every practice, right? In the law, right? If you're a trial lawyer, your job is to let the evidence speak for itself. You don't want to be the star, as much as tempting as it is, right? You want to be the guide for the jury.
You want to be the storyteller. You want to be, and I used to tell, officers and victims, they after a case and they come back, the jury comes back with the right verdict. And they're like, thank you. I'm like, my job was simply to be a mouthpiece. I'm probably the most, overpaid mouthpiece. All I did was just tell the jury what the evidence is, right? In a story. So I'm simply a mouthpiece. Who authored it is probably the lead detective, as he gathered all the evidence. Actors within this story are witnesses, and I'm just the storyteller here. So you're exactly right. Don't stand in the way of the evidence. Joe, spending time in Charlottesville a couple of years ago, what I noticed is that you said you don't want to make it political, but that Albemarle County and Charlottesville, the city of Charlottesville, they're so far apart, and you can tell that there's, they're on opposite ends of the spectrum. You don't have, I often say 80% of us are in the middle, and there's that 10 and 10. I felt like I only saw the 10 and 10 in Charlottesville and Albemarle County. And I'm not sure, maybe because I was up there prosecuting this case and I didn't get a good sense of it, but has Charlottesville healed?
Wow, what a great question.
Welcome to the podcast. No, I'm joking.
Yeah. I don't know when you sort of rip open 400 years of stuff around race and poverty and power differentials. And I think when you so explicitly look at something like that and what the community of Charlottesville's been through, and urban renewal and certain communities being razed to the ground and in their homes and businesses, and I think the best you can do is say it's a process. I don't know if there's ever true healing, and I think it's okay to sort of say that. But I think if you wake up each day and say, we're going to try and do the work to, think about safety and stability through the lens of healing and repair and do a little bit each day. And I understand how naive I am sounding as I'm saying these words, but that's what makes me kind of go to work every day, is to be part of that process of healing. And, I stand on the shoulders of people that went before me, and hopefully people after me will kind of continue to sort of have that vision to do that work. But I think it's just such a process, not only in Charlottesville, but I personally don't think in this country we talk to each other anymore. I think it's just so polarized on both sides. Someone talked about horseshoe politics. The further you get to the extremes, they start to come together.
Yes.
And I think both sides really do a disservice to each other when we don't talk anymore. But I'm on a soapbox now, sorry.
No, you're good. You're good. And also, I mean, of course, as amazing as technology is, it also, we start losing some of these day-to-day interactions.
We're becoming asocial, unfortunately.
Right. I mean, no, but
not anti-asocial. This phone is what we want to interact.
And I've got two of them. It's crazy, right? Like, and I had a third at one point. My paralegal was like, seriously? Like,
that was his burner phone.
That was right. Yeah. Hey, we're outside of your jurisdiction, so we're good, right? So, to see you, Richmond.
You're fine.
I'm good. I'm good. Hopefully they don't listen to this episode. But I mean, even little things like, well, you can just have your groceries delivered. So now you're missing the interaction with the teller, right? And it's amazing to me, like, how you have to be very intentional to have community. But you have to, because we all are human beings and we need it. We need to be a part of that tribe.
Especially if you're the voice of the community.
Absolutely.
Yeah, our new chief of police, Mike Kochis, he's not new anymore. It's been over 2 years. But every week, when he came, he started doing a community walk every week, bringing the patrol officers out to different neighborhoods in the city of Charlottesville. And I started going on several of them. And what I love about the community walks is what you were saying is people don't want to be dealing with the police officer when something bad's happened, either as someone that is getting charged with a crime or being a victim of a crime. And when you have police officers out there talking to people when nothing's gone wrong, and for a while they're like, what are y'all doing here? Like there's like 8 uniformed cops and a prosecutor, like, what are y'all doing here? And it's like just walking around talking to people. And there's a deficit of trust that we're still trying to overcome. And I think it exists in many different communities. But, Tom Perriello, who ran for Congress, said, go where you don't want to go, have uncomfortable conversations, and then keep going back and keep showing up. I paraphrase that terribly. He was much more eloquent, but that's what you got to do. You got to go where you don't want to go, have conversations that are tough, and then keep going back.
And Joe, we've touched on is building trust, but you're building trust through a line of communication. And if you've created that line, the next person that police officer pulls over, if he did have that interaction with the police, is going to be more comfortable with the police.
Hopefully.
And if, because that's one thing, and we can't overlook, and I used to tell police officers that you can't overlook that people are going to be very, very nervous and anxious to be dealing with the police. I was like, let me put you in a driver's seat and have another police officer pull you over. Are you going to tell me you would be anxious or not? And over 90% will say, yeah, And we've seen it before where police officers pull over other police officers on social media, and there's issues and there's back and forth and they're yelling at one another. So you can't lose sight of, when you do have a forceful police encounter, how does that make the other person feel? So by building that line of communication during these walks and at least having the police come out and let them be human rather than police officers, just like you said, the power of the prosecutor. Well, the power of the prosecutor is defined by Joe Platania and what Joe Platania thinks is right to do. And the power of police officer can be defined by that human that people meet on those walks.
And body-worn camera has been a wonderful development because I'll put a plug in for the officers in Charlottesville. That job is so hard. And the patience that they display and the de-escalation and how they're polite to someone screaming at them. And, maybe it being recorded makes them act a little differently, but we just see time and time again where these officers, and I'm sure it's true all over Virginia and the country, there's so many good cops. There are just so many good cops that are public servants. And you can just see where they're doing the job because they love protecting and serving their community, and just them interacting with sometimes really volatile, nasty people. And you're right, and they've got to get it right 100% of the time, or they don't get to be wrong ever. And that's all being recorded. And that's a lot on them too, but it's really good to see them being out, making that effort and buying into that culture.
And imagine if Sharif, Joe, and Niall had a body-worn camera that they had to turn on every time they're doing their job, how tough that job would be for us.
Well, I would make sure I had qualified immunity. No, I'm joking. I'm joking. Joe, it's been a lot of fun. Thank you. Thank you.
It went quick. I hope
we've already gone, gosh, what?
Hey, you can go. It
says right here, 46, 47
You can go with Joe for hours. Joe has so much experience, and Joe, I'll tell you, this is one of those episodes that I was very excited for, and because I got to hear the voice before I got to meet the face, and the voice had always been a voice of guidance and wisdom, and I appreciate what you do for the Commonwealth of Virginia, in particular to the 45,000 that you serve, and they're lucky, and I'll say it, they're lucky to have you as their servant and doing the right job for them.
Well, thank you very much. It's been great spending time with you guys, and it really is every day I wake up, and I really mean this. It's a privilege to be able to do what I do, so I enjoy it.
And I hope everyone that's in Charlottesville appreciates why prosecutors do what they do, including the police, because I will tell you it's not the money. It's the fact that they want to do right, and this man is doing right. And so continue to do right. And we're looking forward to continuing now at least a interaction that's face-to-face that we've finally met in person.
Yeah, it was great. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of RVA Trial Lawyers, Virginia's trial lawyer podcast. For more episodes, check out rvatriallawyers.com.